Welcome back. Next Tuesday is D-Day for the almost 60,000 students who sat the Leaving Cert exams last June. And with CAO offers due to follow on Thursday, the hunt for accommodation is set to intensify over the coming weeks.
For many, it will be their first experience of the rental market. So what should they be looking out for? Here now with some practical advice is John Mark McCafferty, CEO of the housing charity Threshold. Good morning to you, John Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, John Mark.
How you doing?
First of all, with regards to rental accommodation for students in particular, what's the landscape like? Is supply meeting demand, or should it this year?
Sure. Well, there's about 250,000 people in third level education right now. So right now there's a lot of people coming through, young people leaving school and looking for accommodation for the first time with their parents. They see a landscape from a private rented point of view, which is very challenging, where rents are steadily increasing. The one aspect in the last couple of years, which is of note, is the increase in purpose-built student accommodation. So we're seeing in our cities the introduction of these blocks that weren't there, 5 years ago, and they are providing some level of supply, but they're at quite a cost, So you're talking about €1,000 up to about €1,500 a month for some of these places. So they're pitched for more of the international student population, and affordability continues to be a real challenge for a lot of young people who are making that transition to third level and are living away from home.
A lot of mums and dads as well. I know from my own experience, and I come from the country, coming up to Dublin, having a look around, it's like grab the first thing you see. I mean, if it's available and you can afford it, or you think you might be able to manage it for the year, grab the first thing you see. But you'd advise against that. Yeah,
I mean, start early, and I'm conscious it is quite a challenging time for both parents and students. But while you start your search from now, don't feel pressurised to settle for the first place you see, and have a checklist of things that you need to be looking out for. Obviously, if you're going for the purpose-built student accommodation, a lot of stuff is set up. But if you're in the kind of wider private rented sector, then there's a whole host of things to be vigilant.
We love a checklist, John Mark. We love a checklist.
This is a great one.
We've got it on the screen, actually. So the first one then is check that everything. So as you're going around the property, make sure that everything works, like the switches and the.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I guess now with everyone having smartphones, you can take a picture of all of these things, ovens, all the kind of things with moving parts. Check heating, ventilation, mould, whether there's the existence of that. The heating systems, look at the appliances, do they work? But first and foremost, with any of these places, do they exist? I mean, there's a big issue in relation to scams at this time of the year.
What kind of scams are out there at the moment?
Well, for the last number of years, what we've seen in Threshold, and remember, we advise people and we take calls and we meet people who have all sorts of issues in the private rented market and trying to access housing. And some of the scams that we've been hearing about is where people claim to be a landlord of a property. They look for cash up front. They might even give a set of keys. Someone might feel pressurised, often international students, and they may get a set of keys to a non-existent property.
This happened to me a couple of years ago.
Did it really?
I was renting, I was looking for an apartment to rent in Cork 2 years ago, and up came this one, pretty affordable, not too good to be true, but affordable. And it was a lovely apartment. And I got in touch with the seller, or the renter, the landlord, and they said, oh yeah, I'm out of the country at the moment, but if you transfer the money to me, and this has started ringing alarm bells. I went back and looked at the photographs, and the plugs were actually American. I hadn't paid attention to it. It was a stock photo of an apartment with American plugs on the wall. So you gotta just pay more attention to it. And if something is a little bit cheaper than everything else, there's probably a reason for that.
Yeah, well, that's a textbook scam because you probably saw on a legitimate website, a legitimate platform. There was pictures, there was an alleged address, there was a contact for someone, so you were in contact with them either by phone or.
And he said he worked for a highbrow, like a reputable company as well, and he had the email address as well that you can contact him through. Oh, it was full on.
That would have convinced me now.
Yeah, here, take my money.
And all these images that on the face of it seem legitimate and correct. So it's really important that you visit the property, that the key, if you've been given a set of keys, the
Works
keys
on
work.
the door. Yeah.
But also you mentioned about payment, not to kind of pay through Western Union or one of these. That if once you've seen this place, it exists, the keys work, it's legitimate, that you can transfer money through, an account, an escrow account with a BIC and an IBAN. It's traceable.
Can we talk about your legal rights as a student renting accommodation? Do the normal landlord-tenant laws? Do they exist for students as well, or?
It's a mixed bag. Okay. So if you're renting a room, then you're known as a licensee, or I might call it a lodger. So you don't have those rights. But the new legislation that came in this year means that if you're in campus accommodation or purpose-built student accommodation, then you come under the Residential Tenancies Act, and therefore you will be covered by the RTB rules and regulations, the Residential Tenancies Board rules and regulations. You can take a complaint if you need to. So you now come under those rights, and I think that's a really welcome thing. But for people who are in, say, digs, renting a room, they are licensees, and also if they're subletting from someone else, they don't have those rights. However, if they're sharing, say, a house, and that is subject to a lease, maybe 4 or 6 people, then they are covered by the Residential Tenancies Act. However, if you are sharing with strangers or with others, you just got to watch out for a couple of things, because ultimately, at the end of the month, the rent's got to get paid. And if you're sharing a house and someone's not paying the rent, that rent has still got to get paid by the
someone's going to have to pay. Yeah, absolutely. There was one other thing that was just on that list that you mentioned pretty much everything that was on the what not to do list. One thing though was don't rent it through a social media like on Twitter or Facebook. That's not a legitimate means of advertising or finding someone.
Yeah, I guess you have a much higher chance of scams in those spaces. Yeah. So what's really important is that you do those due diligence checks. That the place exists, you visit the place. I mean, it's very challenging because there's so little out there in terms of supply, in terms of the
everyone's desperate anyway, not just
everyone's
students.
Desperate. Yeah. So without kind of creating a sense of panic, it's about saying, get out there early, do have a good look around, ask the questions, don't feel inhibited to ask a question. You're not going to offend anyone. If someone's, a good landlord,
it's your right to iron out who's paying the bills, what bills you're responsible for, and so on. When it's so important before you sign anything.
I recommend bringing a cynical mammy with you. Always,
if you can.
Always have a cynical mammy or daddy in your armoury. John Mark, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Cheers.
Pleasure. For more tips and advice, check out the threshold.ie website.